Hello friends, it's Kat from Meow Meow Kapow. Back in the summer, I started itching to try out some new materials and became curious about gouache. I did a bunch of research on different brands for their quality and pigmentation and opacity and ease of use and price, and eventually just decided to go big or go home. Up front, I want to tell you that Holbein Gouache are by no means inexpensive, especially if you live outside of Japan. However, we're going to set up this palette together over 3 months ago and check in on the paints today. You'll see why I think it was worth it. Like all of my palette setups, labeling is key, and I took the time to write all the names of the colors on a piece of tape and label each individual pan. The Meeden palette I'm using is enormous and already came with 48 clear half pans, so I figured it would be perfect for the 42 pans I intended to fill. Links to the palette as well as all the paints and other materials will be in the doobly-doo down below. There are a few overlapping colors between the 18 color regular artist set and the 24 designer color set that I got, but not very many. I only noticed permanent yellow, lemon yellow, permanent green deep, emerald green, peacock blue, and permanent white being repeated. Many of the other colors are similar, like the ivory black in the regular set and the jet black in the designer set, but they are often slightly yet noticeably different. For instance, the ivory black has a flat and almost pressed looking finish to it, especially when compared to the decadent and velvety finish of the designer set's jet black. The swatch card I'm making for this palette is a lot more simple than the one for my Holbein watercolor palette setup, but the gouache dries so true to color in the pan that I really only need the swatch card for name and opacity reference. One thing a lot of people mention about gouache is that once it's dried, it often cracks and breaks apart. Sure, it can be pretty much infinitely re-wet and used, but if you were to put most other gouache in a travel palette and bring them oot ne boot with you, you'd end up with a case full of crumbled dust. It turns out that I never fully finished recording my setup of this palette, so I hope you'll forgive me for no glamour shots of wet paint, but let's take a look into the future at these paints long since dried in their pans and practically untouched. At this point, the only time that I had used these paints was for a couple of early pieces during Inktober, and then I promptly put this palette on top of a pile of other palettes and forgot about it for 3 months. Not a single pan is cracked! Almost all tube paints shrink considerably when they're put into a pan and left to cure, which is something that I expected from my experiences with watercolor. Honestly, the amount of shrinkage in these is pretty minimal, and the only notably smaller colors are the moderately shrunk permanent yellow and the very shrunken Prussian blue. The Prussian blue shrank to about half of its original size! To test out these paints, I'm going to use this artist coloring book from Pepin Press. It's a decent coloring book with really intricate and beautiful designs inspired by the 1960s. It claims to be usable as a watercolor book, and the pages are decently thick, but I know that they can't take very much water without warping significantly. Luckily, gouache requires very little water to be effective. The bright colors of the designer set were what attracted me to them in the first place, so I immediately went in and tried to color a rose with the color called Rose. It was at this point my heart sank, and I could hear my wallet crying tears over wasted money. It was so transparent. Was it my fault? Was I adding too much water? I don't have much experience with gouache, so it definitely could have been my fault. Okay, don't panic. Just move to a dry spot and try again with a different color. Whew. Okay, maybe I was just using it wrong, because these reds and oranges and blues are all working out great for me. They're super creamy and wet very easily. Actually, the paints are kind of thirsty in the pan, so I started to spritz them every now and again with a little spray bottle and ended up almost never needing to add water to the brush itself. I'm surprised at how opaque everything's turning out to be. Even the yellow is layering well over other colors, especially when I add just a tiny hint of white to it. Okay, let's try the pretty colors again, and... oh no, the pretty colors just don't work. I mean, they do work, they're just way more transparent than the other options available, which is a real shame since the magenta, rose, and opera from the designer color are the only real shot at a clear and beautiful pink and purple available between the two sets. Everything else works just fine, it just seems like these ones require multiple layers to stop being sheer. On the bright side, they layer just fine. Using these gouache, I thought that my skills with watercolor would translate and be helpful, but I felt like I was in a totally unknown territory, and using these actually reminded me more of digital painting than of watercolor. It's easier to start either from a dark or midpoint and then build the highlights on top of that base, rather than starting with light and eventually going dark. When using watercolor, water is arguably the most important and variable part of the equation. You start to get used to using more water to make a color lighter, but with gouache, you need to use more white to make it lighter, because the pigment itself doesn't look as smooth if there's too much liquid involved. I didn't do a lot of color mixing, but what I did made me very grateful for basic color theory knowledge. Mixing complementary colors to tone things down when needed is helpful, but also just being able to mix a good gray out of the black and white will likely be good to experiment with down the line. Gouache also doesn't move very much, even when it's wet, so it was neat not worrying too much about accidentally having my paint bloom, even though it did sometimes flow onto still damp areas and conveniently create unintentional gradients for me. I can tell already that I have a lot to learn, but that I also made an excellent choice jumping straight into the deep end with these, rather than getting my toes wet with something inexpensive and eventually buying these anyway. If I had to choose, as much as I love the bright and vibrant colors from the designer set and actually see myself being more inspired and more experimental because of them, realistically, I think the regular set may be more practical for someone looking for a good group of colors from an excellent brand of paint to start with. I had no trouble with opacity from any of the regular colors, and while you will definitely need to rely heavily on the white in the set to get a lot of good variation in tone, and you simply won't be able to mix the sometimes neon colors from the designer set, you'll be able to use them all really easily, and you'll be able to purchase them even easier. The designer set is often either out of stock or simply not available at all on multiple websites, and it's also significantly more expensive. I purchased mine on Amazon initially, but it got lost in the mail on its way to me from Japan, and I ended up needing to buy again from Dick Blick. Ease of availability certainly factors into my recommendation. I will say though, in my heart of hearts, I'd do all that again despite any troubles I may have had, because even a transparent pink and lost package can't stop me from dreaming of electric rainbow unicorns and glow sticks and lightning bugs in the dead of night. The heart wants what the heart wants, it seems. If you had to choose, which one would you get? Or would you get an entirely different set altogether? I'm pretty new to gouache and am interested in your experiences. Thanks so much for watching. If you want to support me in this channel, please remember to like and subscribe. Until I see you next time, I wish you peace, love, and adequate opacity. Bye!